Well, good afternoon, and I'm glad you were able to join us today. I think you'll find this quite an interesting talk. It's going to be in two parts. One part is about Alzheimer's disease, which very little is known about it. A lot of discussion, but very little knowledge, and that includes the doctors. The second part is how to, if you decide to move ahead and improve your diet or change your diet. We're going to talk about that in some depth. And so you'll be equipped to avoid, statistically speaking, all the diseases that we've talked about. So that in itself is, I think, should be very comforting. And I'm glad that all you lovely people have participated in this and made it an interesting endeavor. So, as I said, there's not a lot of information out about Alzheimer's, but we just so happen to have two medical doctors in our area. I'm in Redondo Beach right now. Of course, that's where I live. And they wrote a book called The Alzheimer's Solution, which I read. It's quite good, in 2017. And they're conducting a 3-year study down here of we call it the South Bay area, where they're enrolling people, I think, over 60, and they're monitoring, through a test every 6 months, how sharp their mind is, and at the same time monitoring their diet and other things. So they're hoping to build a body of evidence which pretty much proves that you can control Alzheimer's through diet and lifestyle. So, Alzheimer's disease was discovered by a German doctor in 1906 who was named Alzheimer, and he discovered it in a woman, and they've never seen anybody get such a bad case of dementia that early. And after they did an autopsy, they could see there was something malfunctioning in her brain, and that's when they named it. And I think everybody's heard of dementia, where you're not as sharp as you used to be. And Alzheimer's is basically an extension of that, where you're losing the mental capability that you've had. And that's like thinking of new things, remembering things that you knew, able to do certain tasks like drive a car or fry an egg or whatever. And you start to lose those functions. And it's growing dramatically around the world, and particularly in the United States. In 2017, we had 121,000 deaths from Alzheimer's, and it's growing. And one of the things about it's somewhat discouraging in a way, but we'll show you that it really doesn't have to be, is that there really is no cure for it. Now, people will talk about slowing it down a little bit, but it's best to deal with it so you never get it. And it's particularly burdensome because, as opposed to like heart disease or cancer, people that really get hit hard with it may pass on in 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Alzheimer's can go on from like 3 to 20 years. And that means you've got somebody that's gradually losing their mental capability, and they feel bad about it. And then if you're their caretaker, you've got this person to deal with. And we dealt with my wife's mother, although we traded her there were 4 siblings, so we had her once every 4 months. And it's somewhat, can be somewhat discouraging as the older they get, the less functional they are. So there's really nothing to hope that they're going to get better. And they get to a certain point where they don't even recognize the caretaker. So we certainly all want to avoid that. Right now, 50% of the people that are over 85 will get Alzheimer's. And it's actually America's costliest disease because it goes on for so long. And so you have medical costs where you try to deal with the symptoms, but then you have the indirect cost as far as medical, in that somebody needs to take care of them for this long period of time. So, and as I said, it can be, I'm sure everybody either has met somebody or knows somebody in their family that's had serious dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So it's, as you can all guess or discover, it's not a lot of fun. Anyway, um, if you just look at it, and here's the thing, if you look at it by country, there are very dramatic differences. Up here in the, like Finland, United Kingdom, United States, very high rates per 100,000 people of mortality from Alzheimer's. And if we remember some of our other statistics, these are countries that eat a lot of meat, dairy, and processed foods. And then we come down here to the bottom of the list, and then we've got Singapore, 0.4 people per 100,000. I mean, so dramatic differences in how many people are getting it. In other countries, Asian countries and South American, where they're largely eating a diet of rice and vegetables. So it's pretty easy to intuit that diet and lifestyle has a tremendous amount to do with this disease. And so to give us some insight into what we're dealing with here, and I found this quite interesting. The average brain weighs 3 pounds, and it's kind of like Jello. And it's a neuron is just a cell that's in the brain. So we call them neuron cells, brain cells. There are 87 billion neuron cells. And interestingly enough, the brain takes up 25% of the bodily energy. Now you would think it would be the muscles because you're doing work with that. But anyway, 50 or 25% of what you eat goes to keep the brain working. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting is each cell can hook up and share data with other cells in the brain. And so a brain cell, a neuron, can connect with just a few cells or up to 30,000. So if you can imagine, here's your brain with 87 billion neuron cells, and each one theoretically can hook up to 30,000. You've got a tremendous infrastructure there of communication going on, and you don't want to disrupt that. And here's another look at the human brain cell or the neuron. And you can see it's like a standard cell, and it has mitochondria in it to process energy and all the other things. But it also has these little stems coming off of it. And and it could have hundreds or thousands of these stems coming off, and they can then make a connection. It's called a synapse with another cell, and they can then all together learn something like how to speak Spanish instead of English, or do mathematics, and they work in groups. So anyway, you start disrupting the synapse, and you start losing the ability to do certain functions. Now, if we look over here at the left, these are healthy neurons, and you can see the little stems there, and they're communicating with each other. And then, but as somebody gets Alzheimer's, things start to change. And the two main things that change are you start getting protein neurotangles within the cell itself. And then you also, the body starts developing what they call amyloid plaques, which are little areas outside of the cells that the body forms. And the feeling is that these two different things are the brain's way to protect itself from either lack of nutrition or other things that may irritate the brain. So they're kind of a defense mechanism. And what's happened is, and you know, we talked about allopathic medicine and research, and the traditional thinking with allopathic, which means you find a symptom and I'll give you a drug, is that they've gone in and studied those two, the tangles and the little blocks of in the brain. They've spent millions of dollars and years, and they've come up with virtually nothing. And the reality is, right now, there is no effective treatment. There are some cases where people that didn't have it too badly were able to stabilize it, and there are some things that slow it down, but there is really no cure, at least right now. And I don't anticipate one, because when you see what's causing it, you've got to change the cause. But if you are, if 90% of the cases can be prevented, so if you follow the guidelines we're going to discuss, you can pretty much guarantee you'll be fine. And just keep in mind, a lot of times the doctor says, "Oh, that's your genes. That's the reason you're getting is your genes." And in fact, people do have different genes, and some people are predisposed to certain diseases, but that they virtually never do anything unless your lifestyle, let's say, pulls the trigger that makes the genes get effective. But in particular, Alzheimer's does have a gene factor that no other disease has, and it's called I would call it an ancient gene. It's a gene that we used to have when we were humanoids running around in China or Africa, basically, you know, just one step from up from, well, just humanoids. And so people ran around and hunted and bare feet and bare legs. And so they were much more prone to stepping on something and cutting themselves or grabbing something like a, that had thorns on it. And so the body was more sensitive to having something like a bacteria or a virus come in. And so it had a tighter sense of protection. Now, we don't need that so much now because we're not out running around barefoot, etc. But in fact, some people still have that gene. So 73% of the population has none of those genes. 25% carries one gene, which increases the risk by 30%. And 2% of the population has two genes, which increase the risk 50%. But you usually know, because if you have it, somebody in your family had to have it too. And if somebody in your family got Alzheimer's, then there's a greater likelihood that you have these genes. And you can test for them if you want to. On the other hand, if you just follow these guidelines, you should be fine. So the brain has, because it's so intelligent, has some unique capabilities that the other parts of the body doesn't have. And if it senses, like I said, two things. One is I'm not getting enough nutrients, or like sugar or toxins or something are come in, it creates these amyloid plaques and fiber tangles, which I think the brain views as protecting itself. So that's one thing that happens. But the other thing, and I remember I grew up in Indiana and we were duck hunting one winter, and I was we were sitting out there and it was about 10 above. And I got so cold that I couldn't use my hands or even my forearms. And that's a protective mechanism that your body has. So it says, if you're starting to get cold, I'm going to pull all the heat in here and make sure that I can keep the lungs and the heart working. And the brain does the very same thing. It has the capability, if it feels that it is not getting enough nutrients, that it has to kind of protect part of the brain, or if it feels like it's getting irritated, it has what its basic function is to keep the autonomic nervous system working. And that means that when you're asleep, the brain's dictating your heart rate, your digestive functions, your breathing, etc. And if it doesn't protect that, then you're going to pass away. So what it'll can do is say, okay, well, here are a block of cells that aren't as critical. I will just shut those down, and they'll never come back again. And so the brain itself can shut down functions to preserve the resource for the nervous system. And it could say, well, I don't need all that memory about Spanish. I mean, that's not primary. So it just shuts down a block of cells. So that's the problem. And if you look here at the top, we've got a healthy brain. It has a nice pink look. It's robust. The neurons are healthy and they're communicating with each other. And once somebody gets Alzheimer's, then the brain no longer looks so healthy because some of the cells have been shut down. It is not as big as it used to be. And the neurons are not communicating because you're getting blocked by the plaque. And that's, of course, what we want to avoid. So these doctors, and they're not the only ones, but they're excellent, have identified what they consider the primary causes of Alzheimer's. And number one, and it's interesting, but it's just like heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, the poor diet that your body did not evolve with will trigger these degenerative diseases. And if you don't get your diet straightened out, then you're setting yourself up to get one of these diseases. So that's number one. But number two, when our ancestors were running around gathering food in the fields and digging up roots and picking berries, it took a lot of work to feed a family. And also, not only were they out looking for things, but there were things looking for them. So they maybe had to deal with foxes or cheetahs or whatever, and be able to run to a tree or run together to fight, etc. So we evolved exercising a lot, and exercise helps your arterial system and your heart, keep its strength, and it helps your lymph system get rid of waste. And so exercise is also, it's very important. And then 4 other things that we'll talk about. If you don't get enough sleep, that makes you more vulnerable to Alzheimer's. If you are constantly dealing with stress, and a lot of stress is you generate it yourself. I mean, everybody is concerned about, like, say, getting hit in a car or making sure they can pay their mortgage or things like that. But there's an awful lot of stress that people have that's really not helping them. And then the other thing is we have all these cells that we've evolved over time that are communicating with each other, and they maintain that communication because they're using it. But it's like the old use it or lose it deal. If you don't keep doing something to stimulate your brain, it's going to say, well, why should I keep this, my knowledge of Spanish going? We don't use it any longer. I'll just shut it down, and those brain cells won't be available any longer. So you need to really you need to keep stimulating your brain. And then the last thing is there's certain toxins. So if you're in an area that's polluted, or if you have like an infected tooth and it's constantly putting um, infection into your bloodstream, that can also, not as common, but it can also affect Alzheimer's. So I have one Alzheimer's joke here that these two guys that get together in the Starbucks every day and chat, and the one guy says to his friend, "Well, you know, Bob, I've I know, and the doctor told me I'm coming down with Alzheimer's." And the guy says, "Well, Al, how do you feel about that?" And he says, "Well, I don't really see it as so bad. I mean, every day I meet all these new people." So that's anyway. So here's the deal. We're going to cover this briefly, and then we'll get into more detail at the other part of the lecture. But remember, we talked about heart disease, how the excess cholesterol and saturated fat clogs these arteries in your body. So there's a shortage of oxygen and a shortage of nutrients. The very same thing happens in your brain. And in fact, what a stroke is that you get a blockage in one of the main arteries in your brain, and it just shuts down a whole block of cells. Well, a stroke is a major thing, but the other thing that happens, if you are getting a blockage in your brain arteries, you're going to start having small strokes, some that you may never even notice. But every time you get a stroke, a whole block of cells die. And they did a study in France. They did MRIs on people that had Alzheimer's, and they would find, like, in somebody's brain, like 60 different areas of kind of like a small circle of dead cells that had been caused by a minor stroke in the brain. So that's one of the primary things is you've got to get cholesterol and saturated fat largely out of your diet. Not to say you can't eat it occasionally, but you need to largely get it out. Another thing is, those cells need to be healthy. And if you're not eating enough nutrient rich cells, the brain's going to say, well, geez, I'm afraid my cells aren't working well. I better shut some down. And then you want to avoid things that irritate the brain or the arteries. And one of them is table sugar. We talked about that. So this all ties into a healthy diet. And again, we've seen this before, meat and dairy products have saturated fat and cholesterol. Sugar irritates the arteries. Smoking and excess alcohol irritate the arteries. And these are all things you want to avoid because you want healthy arteries in your brain. And I think everybody would agree with that. And these are autopsies that were done in France, and their arteries from the cranium, and the ones on top are people's arteries that died a death, natural death, didn't have Alzheimer's, didn't have heart disease or stroke. And then the arteries down here at the bottom are arteries in the brain that people died of Alzheimer's, and look at them. They're 90%, 80% blocked. Well, you're not going to be healthy if your arteries are all blocked. So we'll come back and talk about the diet more. But there's other things that are going on, and this is the one that a lot of people don't like. they they think, well, I go out and walk the dog. Well, if the dog just, you're just kind of, taking 4 or 5 steps and the dog stops to smell the grass, you're really not getting much exercise. And what they recommend is a minimum of 150 minutes per week. And exercise means you are doing something, you're moving enough that over a little bit of time, maybe, 5 minutes or whatever, your heart rate goes up and your need for oxygen increases. And I'll tell you what we do. We take a walk every day for about a mile and a half, and we walk at a not running, but a rapid pace. And then there's a hill we get to. It's about 100 yards, like a football field, and at a rate that we can handle, we run up the hill, and that really gets our heart rate up, and it gets our breath up, and that's what you need to do. I mean, so there are a lot of ways to get that aerobic exercise, and like I say, fast walking, climbing a hill. If you don't have a hill, you can just walk up and down your stairs in your house if you have stairs. And then obviously a lot of people are buying used to bicycle outside, now they're getting bicycles in the house that you can ride, and so they get your heart rate up, and that's very important. And then something else, and it's more than just your brain, but particularly women as they get older, they tend to have osteoporosis, weakness of the bones. And the way to really help that is to, but men too, get some resistance training. And one of the best ways to do it, and you can do it at home, is what they call mini squats. And so it's just like you're going to sit down, but you don't actually sit down. You get that almost ready, and then you stand up again. And, start off and do 10 in the morning and the evening, just like you're going to sit down, you stand up and then do it again. And that's an excellent exercise. And the other thing, it strengthens your bones, but it builds up the leg muscles. And so people that get older, if they lose muscle strength, they're more likely to fall. And this will help you from falling and breaking a hip. And then there are other things you can do in the house, like, get some 5-pound weights and do some curls and, overheads and things like that, or get a cable. I have a cable that I used when the gyms were closed that I could do different exercises. So those are all things that you can add, and they really don't take much time. The other thing is they suggest that don't just do your exercises like in the morning and then watch TV, the rest of the day. I mean, even when you're relaxing, it's good to every hour, every couple hours, get up, walk around, do something to keep your body moving. And I've had a lot of people say, well, I tried that and I just couldn't pull it together. And the best way to pull anything together is have a written program. So you make a list of the exercises you're going to do and maybe set some targets. So I'm going to do, for the first month, I'm going to do 20 mini squats every day. And then once I do that, then maybe I'll go to 30 mini squats every day, and keep track of it so you can see if you're making progress. And that dramatically helps people on a program like this. Okay. Now, when I was younger, I had no problem sleeping. I had a bigger problem was making sure I got up in time. But anyway, that passed. Now, there are two functions with regard to sleep that are very important that your brain does. And if you can kind of imagine, your brain all day is taking in information, and it could be something you saw on TV, how best to get to Sprouts Grocery or whatever. something you read, somebody told you. Well, your brain doesn't want to and doesn't have room to store all that. So what it does is while you're asleep at night, two things. One is it goes through and says, all right, we know how to do the trip to Sprouts. We know how to, cut up a watermelon, etc. I don't need to store that again. I'm going to get rid of all this unnecessary data. What my sister told me, she's told me 100 times. I don't need that. But I did hear some interesting things about Social Security. I do want to remember that. So your brain goes through and eliminates unnecessary data and waste products. But if you don't get enough sleep, your brain doesn't complete that, and you end up with excess unnecessary data in your mind that blocks the ability to store good data. So that's why sleeping is important. And now, some people have no problem sleeping, and you can just disregard this. But some people have problems, or sometimes they have intermittent problems. And I'm just going to give you a list of things that you can consider. And if you have sleep issues, you may want to take a look at them. But number one, 35% of Americans are not getting enough sleep. And I know I have a lot of guys that I talk to at the gym that say that it's not as easy to go to sleep as it used to be. So here are some guidelines. Um, if you like to go to bed at 10, make sure you've eaten your complete dinner by 7. You want to have at least 3 hours from your last meal until you go to bed. And even more is better. And there are certain things that that stimulate you, like caffeine, and there's caffeine in chocolate, and sugar's a stimulus. Don't have any caffeine, chocolate, or sugar after 2 p.m. And your body likes a regular schedule. And so it's ideal. I mean, and it can be whatever you want it to make it, but a common one is go to bed at 10 and get up at 6, or go to bed at 10 and get up at 5:30, or go to bed at 10 and get up at 7. But just try to hit regular hours as much as possible. Another thing, ideally, light in the room can be a bit of an irritant, and electronics like televisions, um, other electric devices put out energy. It's better to have no light in the room, or maybe just a little bit light that you can see if you need to get up. And make sure you shut off your TV or any other, like your computer. And what you really don't want is EMFs near where you're sleeping, the electronic magnetic fields. And so if you have a PC, personal computer, or laptop, or anything like that, make sure it's not in the room or it's completely shut off. And, I've got a router with my PC so we can have Wi-Fi in the house. And I got an instrument to measure it, and those routers put out a ton of EMFs. And so we either shut it off or night. Well, first it's upstairs and we sleep downstairs, but the router puts out EMFs. And the other thing you can do, and you can get a shield, and they don't, maybe for $30, you can put a shield around your router. And so it doesn't put out those electro EMFs. So that's something that you should consider. Um, some people get wound up when they watch a TV show, particularly if it's an adventure or maybe scary or something. It's for some people. I would recommend turning off the TV 30 minutes before you go to bed, and then keep the room cool. It's easier to sleep if it's cool, and no noise. And if you're wound up, we're going to talk about relaxing, but sometimes it's good just to do something that's very relaxing before you go to sleep. What you don't want to do is lay down and then try to solve today's problems because then, then you really get frustrated. But, there's some just simple meditation things like you just sit down and just take several long, deep breaths, and then go to sleep. Okay, now one of the things that you should try to avoid, and this is not easy, but I know some people that are always stressed out about something, and the problem is if you're stressed out about something you have no control over, it accomplishes nothing. So I mean, if I'm stressed out about whether North Korea is going to launch a missile or whether China is going to do anything about global warming, I mean, yeah, that's not good, but I gain nothing by worrying about it. And so anything if there's something you're concerned about, you sit down and say, can I do anything about it? If the answer is no, and just say, okay, I'm going to turn that over to my spiritual friend or whatever. Now, there are things that are worth getting stress over. That's what motivates you to do something. And like I say, I want to get more exercise. And it makes it a lot simpler if you first write down, just, okay, better exercise, and set up a timeline and say, okay, I'm going to do these exercises uh, twice a day, and I'm going to do a certain number, and then follow along. And so you're really taking the stress away because you've laid out a plan to deal with it. So that's a good one. And here's another one. Particularly when I was still working, or you know, if you have family issues or whatever, it's good to have a relaxing technique. And the one I used to use at work, because I was in sales and sometimes sales management, sometimes, something had happened and be upsetting. Before I say anything, I just stop and just shut my eyes and take 10 deep breaths. And then after you do that, then you can react in a much calmer way. Other relaxing techniques, kind of get together with friends or family. That doesn't work for me because my family are on the opposite side of my political interest. But just, you get together with your friends, that's relaxing. I think for me, listening to rock and roll or rap is not relaxing, but maybe just some quiet classical music or something is. And I found it extremely relaxing just to walk if there's a park or around the block somewhere where there's some trees and some green things. And then certain spiritual practices like praying or um, chanting or whatever can be very relaxing. So, and then here's another one that is highly recommended. Uh, Maybe some of you have tried it. It's called meditation, and the two people sitting here are both meditating. And I've been doing it for 40 years, so I have, I'm fairly knowledgeable. And I'm just going to give you a quick idea of how you might do that. And if you've already done it, then you'll already know. But the best thing to do is either sit on the ground or sit in a chair. And if it's in a chair, have your feet flat on the floor. And I like to sit with my back up against something. It's already on a chair, but on the floor, I sit with my back up against the couch or the wall or something. It's also good to elevate so your hips are higher than your knees. So I always sit on a pillow and to make sure my hips are higher. And then once you're in that position, you shut your eyes. And what you want to do is not be thinking about anything that is going to disturb you want to be completely without thought. So one way to do it is sit down and maybe take 10 deep breaths, a long breath in, hold it a little bit, and then let it out slowly. And do that about 10 times just to settle yourself down. And then you shut your eyes. And what you want to do is focus on something so you aren't thinking, because you can't think and you can't do two things at once. So I just focus on the breath. And when I breathe in, my mind just follows it like 6 inches into my lungs. And when I breathe it out, my mind follows it about 6 inches outside of my nose. And it just goes back and forth. And my breathing gets slower and slower. And I get to the point where I don't need to focus on it at all. And then you're really in a state of deep meditation. Some people find it easier to have a phrase, something that is comfortable for you, and you might say, peace on earth, and you just say, peace on earth, peace on earth, peace on earth, or something simple like good health, or I love my spiritual teacher, or whatever. But and you follow that, and now what'll happen is you start to get in a rhythm, and then a thought will come in and say, geez, it's too bad my son, can't get a good job, or whatever. And so you notice the thought, and then, but just let it go, let it float out, and go right back to the breath or the phrase. And as you do it more and more, you'll get fewer interruptions, and you'll get to a point where you can just sit there virtually and have nothing going on in your mind. And that is extremely restful. So, something you may want to consider. Okay. Now, we said if you don't use it, you lose it. And your brain needs something challenging, something that it feels like it has to think about, it has to memorize something new, develop new connections, etc. And one of the things that tend to interrupt that is people spend too much time watching TV, or maybe they spend too much time reading romance novels that are perhaps interesting, but it's not enhancing their vocabulary or engaging the thought process. Uh, some other things that occasionally happen, people hit 60 and they say, I was, I thought I'd be able to be a great golf player. And they feel like they're not a great golf player, and they say, well, I'm 60, it's not going to get any better, I'm just going to quit trying. Well, you don't want to do that. I mean, because you could have 30 more years, and there are a lot of things you can do. So try to reset your expectations. And then a couple other issues is over time, some of your friends may move away, some of them may pass away. It's always good to be out where you have a chance to meet new people, or at least or talking to people other than yourself. So here's some suggested things that if you, and a lot of people are, they're very busy, they're fine, they don't need any of this. I found it quite helpful. If you want to continue to build up your mind, here are some suggestions. Read more nonfiction. Read nonfiction where you're learning something. And if you see new words, look them up, and even write them down so you're increasing your vocabulary. I find it challenging to do crossword puzzles. Other people like chess, that Japanese Sudoku business. And, like you're taking a class at community college, that's a wonderful thing. There are DVDs you can get, there are Zoom classes, etc. So you're constantly adding something new to your knowledge. Something else that you can do if you're involved in in investing to start doing some of the research yourself. There's tons of information on the internet. I get mine through Fidelity and other groups, and you can sit down and just analyze some potential stocks and buy a few. You know, it may only cost $10. And then, so that's one thing. And then to get out and meet people, and maybe the people already know, but it's somebody different than just the people at home. And you can do that by volunteering or maybe assisting at a church or at a hospital or something. And there are a lot of social groups. Some people get together and play bridge. They have groups at church. There are birding hikes that are fun if you like birding, or just hiking in groups, going to the gym. So these are all things that, you know, if you're saying, boy, we had an aunt, and I said, what did you do today? And she said, oh, I just sat there and watched the paint dry, or I watched the dust settle. And I said, well, I think, you know, if you put a little work in, you can find something more interesting to do than that. So, those are some suggestions to deal with Alzheimer's. Now we're going to go back and take a look at what you can do to, if you decide you want to get on a better diet. Here's some things you may want to consider. And we looked at this before, and these are the causes of virtually all the major diseases that we get in the United States. And they're all mostly degenerative diseases. And almost all of them are tied to a poor diet, bad habits like smoking, too much animal protein. In fact, the only ones that aren't tied to it are like somebody falling, or an automobile accident, or taking an opioid. So anyway, if you want to improve yourself, you can just, it's intuitively obvious here that that's where you want to go. So we talked about this before, and I said there are two kinds of people. They're carnivore, well, not people, but two kinds of animals. They're carnivores, like lions and tigers and dogs and cats and wolves, etc. And look at their teeth. Very different. And then there are herbivores, people that evolved eating largely fiber, fruits and vegetables, grains, etc. Completely different set of teeth. Now, obviously, the one on the right, these are the teeth of humans. And do they look like a carnivore's teeth? Not at all. That's because we evolved eating a certain way, and we have these teeth on the front that allow us to cut, like bite through a stem or a leaf or an apple. Carnivores don't have any teeth like that. All they do is they rip meat and swallow it. And that's what their teeth do. They can't chew. We on the other hand, we have teeth to cut vitamin or fiber and vegetables, etc. And then if we're eating grain, we have these teeth in the back to grind it, to grind the grain. Now, if we were meant to be carnivores, we would have teeth like this, but we don't. So this is just physiologically, it's obvious that our teeth were designed to not eat a lot of meat. And in fact, humans have flat teeth because they cut vegetables. Canine teeth rip vegetables. We have flat molars to grind grain like wheat. Canines have no teeth like that. The food we eat is fruits and vegetables and grains are fairly easy to break down. So the carnivores need to digest meat quickly, otherwise it'll start to spoil. So the acid in a carnivore is 20 times stronger than the acid in our stomachs. And on the other side, if you're a carnivore, you eat something quickly and you get rid of it because it'll start to spoil. So their intestinal tract is like 3 times their body length. our intestinal tract is 12 times our body length because we bring in those vegetables and grains and we take more time to digest them. But the big difference here is carnivores, because they evolved that way, eliminate cholesterol. Their body takes it and just they get rid of it. We don't do that. When our body wasn't designed to handle cholesterol, so when we take it in, it our body says, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, let's just line the arteries with it, and that's what happens. So humans historically and should eat less than 5% of meat. Carnivores eat 100%. And if you eat less than 5% of your caloric intake, you should be fine, but not more than that. Okay, now, one of the reasons that we don't eat as well in the United States as we could is that we have all these tempting ads to pull us into the wrong track. And here's a striking model that, somebody might say, boy, and she says, I want to look good. I want to have strong bones. I want to, keep my shape. I want to do a lot of things. Got milk. The implication here is if you drink milk, you'll look like her, or maybe you'll date somebody that look like her. The reality is, and they were sued over this, it's a complete lie. There are much better ways to get calcium than milk. And milk has all these negative things that it causes autoimmune. It irritates a lot of people's sinuses. 70% of the world is lactose intolerant. They can't even digest it. I'm talking about milk from other species than your own. You obviously want to drink human milk when you're a child. So, but there are all these temptations to get us into the wrong thing. And if you look at it, why we have so many people, and I'm going to say 90% of the people in the United States are eating largely a destructive diet, that on the pro side, there are plenty of statistics and medical research and books and doctors, some doctors, laying it out, just like all the information I got from these. But that's not commonly available. You have to go looking for it. Whereas on the con side, there are a lot of vested interests here. I mean, like the government already knows that meat and dairy is bad for you. It came out of that study. But the meat and dairy industry makes all kinds of political contributions to the representatives and to the senators. And they'll go to the Department of Agriculture and whoever and the EPA, and you never get any information from the government or any of these institutions that say it's bad, because all the politicians don't want to lose their political contributions. This country is largely run by big business contributing to representatives and senators to get what they want. I'm saying largely, not completely. And so you come down here and you've got the meat industry saying you need protein, which you don't. You actually shouldn't eat it. You shouldn't eat meat protein. We just talked about the dairy industry. The pharmaceutical industry basically bought out the medical industry. So they're, instead of recommending changing your diet, they're recommending drugs. And the medical industry, somebody asked a doctor and he says, well, Joe, why don't you tell your heart patients to change their diet? And he says, well, two reasons. He says, one, I tell them and they never listen to me. And there is some truth in that, but it's certainly not universal. And he said, the other thing is, if I tell somebody to eat spinach, I get $100. If I do a bypass, I get $120,000. So there's very little motivation for them to get you to change your diet. Okay, I'm just going to show you this briefly, but here are some of the noted doctors and scientists that have put out all kind of wonderful books about the value of eating a whole food plant-based diet. And I've met most of these people. The Pam Popper is the one that I got my uh, teaching certificate from. And so there's plenty of literature out there telling you that what I'm saying is 100% true, but it's just not readily available. I mean, you have to go looking for it. Now, um, I think this is interesting because it gives you a sense of how we're doing in this country. And on the horizontal axis, it shows the life expectancy of people. On the vertical axis, it shows how much per person is spent on healthcare a year. So if you come over here and look at the United States, we spend roughly $8,500 per person per year on healthcare. And then you come down here at other countries that actually live longer than we do, like Korea, that spends 2,000, or Israel that spends 2,000, or New Zealand that spends 3, or Switzerland that spends like 5. We spend twice as much as every other country in the world. Well, yeah, any other country in the world, and our lifespan is right in the middle. Look at here we got Switzerland 83, Japan's not on here, it's out up to 83, France, Norway, New Zealand. A lot of countries live longer than us, and that's a whole country. If you take a look at groups like Loma Linda, they lived to 90 or 94, or Okinawa. So it's obvious we could be doing a lot better. And one of the reasons is so many people in this country are eating a very poor diet. Now, part of the reason too is that we can afford to. A lot of countries don't have the money. I mean, like Thailand, they don't have the money to eat much meat, and they're lactose intolerant, so they don't eat much dairy. So they basically eat rice and vegetables, and that's the same for Korea and Japan. But we have, most people have adequate money, and there are all kinds of the availability of poor food, like fast food, factory farms, etc. So here's another thing, and this amazed me, but the very same drugs that we buy in this country, you can get for a third of the price, in some cases a tenth of the price, a fourth of the price in other countries. And that's why, people going down to Tijuana, every third store down there is a pharmacy. They can get their drugs down there for a third of what they'd pay up here. And that's the same with people on the Canadian border. They go into Canada to buy their drugs. And you say, well, why is that? Well, the reason is that the pharmaceutical industry pays so much to their senators and representatives that they've let them run the prices up. And, and there are people out here that are making the decision, can I afford to pay my rent or take my insulin? Now, if they really knew what was going on, they wouldn't need the insulin because they wouldn't quit eating meat, but they don't know that. So people are having to make this decision all the time. And that's why it's good if you can avoid drugs in this country, because they're so much more expensive than anywhere else you can get them. Now, we talked about this before, but I want to put it in kind of another way of looking at it. When I think of a meal, I think of first, is it nutritious? Is it healthy? And then I say, okay, here's what a meal should combine at least 3 things. One, I want a whole grain like wheat or buckwheat, and I'm going to throw potatoes in there because they're not a grain, but they're full of carbs, or potatoes or sweet potatoes or whole wheat pasta or brown rice, because these carbs give me two things. They give me the energy I need to function, and they give me a lot of fiber to get my intestinal system working right. So that's number one. Then I come over here to beans. Beans are very important because they give me plenty of animal protein. I'm sorry, plenty of vegetable protein. And they give me plenty of fiber. My intestinal system works. And then the third thing is I want vegetables because vegetables are the best source of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber, etc. And those three things are what I need every day to be truly healthy. And then it's fun to throw in some seeds and nuts, fun to throw in some fruit, and if there's other things like you want to get a French fries every once in a while. I mean, it's not saying you have to stay on that, but that's the way you should think about a meal is whole carbs, beans, and vegetables. And again, I showed you this. I think it's worth mentioning. Dr. Furman put together, he called it the aggregate nutrient density index, and that shows you what you want in a diet. And you want low calories so you don't get fat. You want low cholesterol so you don't get heart disease or stroke. You want plant protein because you don't want to get cancer. You want fiber so you don't get colon cancer and so your intestinal system works right. You want vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. And a lot of people say, well, I take a daily vitamin. Well, they've done study after study, and vitamins in a bottle are like nothing like in a plant because in order to make a vitamin, they have to eliminate all the other things. And so vitamin A in a tomato is completely different than synthesized vitamin A in a pill. And then you want antioxidants to take care of your free radicals. So that's what we're looking for here. So again, another way to look at this diet is say, okay, these numbers tell you how much of the different nutrients you want, but you want to get a lot of nutrients, you're up here on the left in the green and other vegetables. You want to get your protein, you're over here in the beans. You want to get your starchy vegetables for your and whole grains for your carbs, the potatoes, the sweet potatoes, oats, barley, brown rice. That's the way I think, is making sure that I'm getting food from those three groups. And they also say the more colorful your diet, the healthier it is. And that's largely true. A lot of green vegetables, colored vegetables, etc. And this is basically saying the same thing, but just I'm going to mention it again. It's his list of the content of the nutrients you're getting. Kale and collards and Swiss chard give you roughly 1,000 units in a cupful. I come down here and eat white pasta or white bread or feta cheese, and I get 16 or 17. Now that's ridiculous. I mean, over on the bottom right, you're getting food with virtually no nutritional assistance. Over here, you're getting the best nutrition you can possibly get. So it doesn't say you shouldn't eat a little white pasta, but you ought to make sure you get some green vegetables, broccoli, etc., frequently. Okay, and I've showed you my typical diet, but I'll put it in the context of, okay, oatmeal, that's my carb, whole carb right there. Black beans, that's my protein. Steamed kale, that's my vegetable. And here's some pumpkin seeds for zinc and some blueberries as an antioxidant. I come down here for lunch. large tossed lettuce salad with many other. That's my vegetables, rye crackers for a little bit of carbs, beans again for the protein, and then just some other carrots and walnuts. And then dinner, okay? Sweet potato is the carb, steamed broccoli is the vegetable, mushrooms and onions because they inhibit cancer, and hummus, which is chickpeas, that's my protein. So you try to get something like that every meal. Okay, now you'll a lot of these ads will say, "Oh, get off of carbs; they're really bad." That's completely untrue. Carbs are wonderful. What you want to get off of is processed carbs like donuts, cookies, cakes, white crackers, etc., because all the good stuff's been taken out. But whole carbs, every ancient civilization in the world has been based around a whole carb because they were relatively inexpensive to produce. They could store them that they'd last through the winter, and and they had the nutrients they needed to be healthy. And so, if you look at Egypt, like barley and corn, uh, Persia, wheat and barley, Rome, wheat, barley, etc., India, rice and millet, China, soybeans, Incas, quinoa and potatoes, Europe, barley, potatoes, wheat, etc. The reason these people were able to get together and have large cities and have a focus on different skills instead of everybody running around trying to catch an antelope or pick a berry was because they could take a whole carb and have a very efficient way of eating and a very healthy way. Now, we just take a quick look at some of these different options here. And like I said, unprocessed carbs are the best way to get your energy to keep you warm, and so you're able to do things. And uh, sweet potatoes are great. That's why Okinawa, their whole diet is based around sweet potatoes. Buckwheat is a wonderful grain. Brown rice is a great grain. Buckwheat has no gluten. Brown rice has no gluten. Corn, if you eat corn, make sure it's non GMO because 95% of the corn in the United States is sprayed with Roundup, and it has a chemical in it called glyphosate, and it gives people cancer, etc. And then there are many kinds of beans, and they're great for fiber, great for protein. They have almost as much protein as meat, but they're much healthier. And here's what we do with them: we buy lentils, split peas, all different kinds of beans. We put them in a cook pot. My wife puts other things in there like onions and mushrooms, turmeric, some seaweed, all kinds of different spices and herbs. And we'll make a pot of those, and they'll typically last for 3 days. So that's how we handle the bean situation. And then virtually, well, there are many vegetables. They're all good. There is no bad well, maybe poison ivy, but there's no bad vegetable. But Swiss chard, kale, and spinach are at the top of the list as far as nutrients. And then it's really liver or beets are very good for your liver. Mushrooms and onions and garlic are excellent because they inhibit cancer. And then fruit has a lot of vitamins and minerals and fiber, and blueberries are great. Black raspberries are great. They're they're high in antioxidants. And I particularly like papayas and watermelon because they're easy to digest and they're very they taste, great. And then we eat some seeds. And since you're no longer eating, you may not any longer be eating meat or fish, you do need omega 3. And we take omega 3 pills, but there's omega 3 in walnuts, in flaxseed, in chia seeds. Some people are short of selenium. There's a lot of selenium in Brazil nuts. There's a lot of zinc in pumpkin seeds. So we have nuts occasionally. And here's all the different kind of nuts that you can eat. And we have them out. So if I want to get in a snack, we grab a few. But nuts have a lot of fat in them. They're healthy fat, but you don't want to eat too many because there's too many calories. So you might say, well, okay, this looks good, um, but it looks challenging. What's the best way to do it? Well, one way is just, they say, go cold turkey and just cut over completely. So you immediately get all the benefits, but that's tricky because now you've changed your whole way of thinking and you've got, new foods to pick out and learn to do. And, and certainly some people do this and it's fine, but an easier way is say, okay, let's take this in steps. And let's start off and say, I am not going to eat any more white sugar. And that's like sucrose. So and that means that you're going to have to look at all your processed foods and all your canned foods and either get rid of them or eat them and don't buy them again. But there's so much sugar in cereals and sauces and things like that. Start there, get rid of your sugars, and then maybe go to dairy. And there's things you can substitute and get off the dairy, etc. Or there's another way, and just say, okay, we're gonna do it by day, and say every Sunday we're gonna go whole food, plant based. And once we get that under our belt, then maybe we'll say, okay, we'll do Sunday and Wednesday, and just gradually, work it into your schedule. Okay, now here's something else I want to mention. Not everybody knows this, and you can get this on the internet. And I'd first say eating any fruit or vegetable, whether it's organic or not, is better than eating a processed like a donut or a hamburger or whatever. But if you're eating vegetables, there's some that are known to have a lot of toxins in them because of the way they're sprayed. And there's some that are known to not have any. And it's a good idea to get a list. And so, like, we never over here, because they're sprayed, we never eat peaches, apples, celery, strawberries, carrots, unless they're organic or unless we can't find organic, because they're known to have a lot of toxins. Whereas you come over here and some of them are fine, like broccoli, blueberries, papayas, cabbage, bananas, asparagus, mangoes, etc. And you want to make sure that you're not eating anything that has Roundup in it because it causes cancer. And that is in particular soy products or corn products. And so if you see corn syrup on a package, you can pretty much be sure it has sprayed with Roundup, unless it says either non-GMO, which means no Roundup, or organic, which means no Roundup. Okay, and we mentioned this briefly, but I'm just going to make a few points. think of the three, like I said, the grain, the protein, and the vegetables. And so, okay, I need some protein here. Well, instead of eating fish or beef, a big serving of beans or lentils or a veggie burger will give you all the protein you need. And if you're using cow's milk on something, you can get soy milk or almond milk. And if you're eating things with sugar or putting in your coffee, we use a natural product called stevia or monk fruit. And it's just as sweet and it's healthy. And then come over here, and some of the supplements that we take are once you become a vegetarian, well, actually, almost anybody needs B12, but particularly vegetarians do. So we always take a B12. And a lot of people, particularly women that may have issues with osteoporosis, may be taking calcium. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you get an equal amount of magnesium because the calcium doesn't work by itself. And so if you're taking 500 units of calcium, you want 500 units of magnesium. You don't want to take magnesium supplements by themselves. Turmeric is excellent. It's an anti-cancer spice. Some people are missing iodine. You can get that in salt products or in seaweed. If you're not getting out in the sun without block, you need a vitamin D. And then chlorella, which is relatively inexpensive, is whitewater algae. And it's wonderful for breaking down fat muscles and getting rid of toxins that might be stored in them. So I just mentioned this that some of the greatest minds in the world in history have been vegetarians or vegans. And you just look Buddha, Socrates, Leonardo da Vinci, Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Albert Schweitzer, Mark Twain, Albert Einstein, and then more currently, Bill Clinton got really sick and he went to one of the doctors I had on the list, and the guy put him on a whole food plant based diet, and he's been on it ever since. So there are a lot of very famous people that made the choice and were vegetarians their whole life. So I'm going to just summarize here, and then we'll take a few questions. But be very wary of a lot of the ads and articles you see, because most of them or many of them are promoting certain foods or certain food industries. And most doctors do not recognize food as an issue, even though it's the primary issue because of the influence of the pharmaceutical industry. So just because your doctor doesn't say you need to do this, disregard it, because 90% of them don't use diet um, as a solution. And your health is largely tied to your diet and your lifestyle. Only 98% of the people are largely are not affected by genes. Genes are usually not a deal. If you want to read more, one of the best books to read is Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. And it discusses both why to eat certain way and then how to do it. It's got all kinds of recipes. And then keep in mind, even though the doctor may not tell you this, you want to treat the cause, not the symptom. The symptom is like too much cholesterol, high blood pressure, too much sugar in your blood. Those are the common symptoms that most senior Americans have. And they'll give you a drug. So you're treating the symptom. What you want to do all these things are caused by your diet. So you want to treat the cause, and the cause is your diet. So I hope you are all able to use this information at some level, and that you have an excellent and healthy life. And we are going to, if anyone that has any questions, we'll be happy to give it a shot, you know. So anyway,
we're going to unmute and just give everyone an opportunity to ask Wendell. Wendell, thank you very much. I believe this was your third session. Are you scheduled for the summer?
no, I don't schedule that often because um, I'll probably maybe in 6 months schedule again. But
Okay. So I'm sure Hema will be in touch with you. One of the things that you mentioned, and I do know that they're coming back in the, I believe, the two doctors that you mentioned, they've actually presented twice here with us. And Mr. Bailey, I think you might have attended that meeting. I'm not sure who else attended. Dr. Shirazi, he and his wife both presented to us.
oh, great, yeah,
Yes.
very talented, and they I read their book, and everything I said they back up 100%.
Freda indicated she got Dr. Foreman's book from the library, and she started eating better ever since the last meeting and felt better. Slipped a day, but the information is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. We've placed in the chat the link to the course evaluation. If you would take an opportunity and just let us know how much you appreciate Wendell and how much we want him back, and just give us your feedback on that. It is anonymous, and we do share that with the curriculum committee and our lecturers. I wanted to also say that the Frida mentioned she got her book from the library. I'm not sure if that is the CSUDH library, but remember, as OLLI members, you do have access to that library database, both online and in person. So you might sometimes check out videos, check out information through the CSUDH library, which also links you to all 122 other campuses, not 123, but 23 other campuses. So
okay. Let me just say one thing here. That book has been out for some time, but it's still completely valid, and I think it's fine to start with getting it at the library, but it only costs like $5. I mean, and you spend that much for lunch. So, or I mean, half of that for lunch. It's a book that you're going to want to, if you read it, you're going to want to use it because it's got all these recipes and guidelines on how to eat and answer all these questions. And so if you really try to get into it, you want to have that book as a reference. So I would buy it, and you know, and then you can use it the rest of your life. And I recommend it because I mean, I give it to people sometimes that have a hard time getting on the program. And that's my suggestion.
Is that Eat to Live?
Yeah, Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. Excellent book.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the class also.
Oh, great.
And, yeah. And Nicole,
excellent.
Yes, I was on Nicole. I was on one of the presentations that the doctors that were in the South Bay did.
Oh, good.
I'm glad to see that everyone is joining us for that, including our Alzheimer's series. Wendell, we do a series and have been doing a series with LA Alzheimer's. And I know the Older Adults Center also presents with them. So Wendell, this is very informative. It fits right in with some of our other curriculum and course subjects that we're doing. So thank you. I'm
Thank
going
you.
to recording at this time. I should have stopped it before.